Welcome to the first ever episode of The Staff Room, a teaching and learning podcast which takes a look into the world of pedagogy. In this series, we meet educators far and wide to chat about and share outstanding practice. My name is Michael Royale, and I'm sitting here with Tessa Johnson, and we're coming to you from Corpus Christi College in Perth, Australia.
In this episode, we are going to explore how technology is rapidly changing our classrooms. We'll be speaking to Director of Learning Technologies, Apple Distinguished Educator Daniel Budd, who's going to chat with us about how technology, in particular the iPad, has changed teaching and learning at our school, Corpus Christi College.
What we really try and do at Corpus is ensure that technology is enhancing what teachers are doing in teaching and learning space. They're not using it for the sake of using it.
We also hear from iPad Art Room Cathy Hunt, a passionate Apple Distinguished Educator and keynote speaker from Australia's Gold Coast. She'll be sharing her experiences with the way technology has become part of the very fabric of her practice.
The iPad's that great conduit towards like a larger screen real estate, getting their hands on that, really being able to look up close at photos in detail, getting their pencil on it, but also working right on out of that screen.
I'm Michael Royale.
And I'm Tessa Johnson.
And this is The Staff Room. To give you some background, Corpus is a one-to-one iPad BYOD school, meaning that all students bring their own device from home. Hey Tessa, what's your experience with the technology so far?
I guess if I think of my initial impression when I heard that I was working at a school like Corpus, it was fear, to be honest. My own experiences, I went to school at a BYOD school as well, and I remember very vivid memories in year 12, sitting at the back of the class trying to play Tetris sort of as softly as I could so that my humanities teacher didn't catch me. So when I started at Corpus Christi, I thought, oh no, the kids are going to be doing that to me. But since working here, I've really been inspired with the ways that technology, I guess, can not only substitute but really enhance learning.
Yeah.
As an English teacher particularly, essay feedback, the fact that there's so many different apps that you can do that all on your laptop, that's just, so phenomenal for me.
Yeah,
How
definitely.
about you, Michael?
Well, it's really interesting you say that, because I used to actually go here when I was a student as well, and obviously, well, it wasn't a BYOD school back then, and I also worked in Karratha before, where they were rocking Dell computers that were, selling for about $140 on eBay,
Nice.
and potentially even using Windows 97 on those. But so my main experience with technology, at least at Corpus, has been extremely profound, not just for the students, but also for myself. It's just made my life a whole lot easier with tracking their progress and, like you said, providing feedback.
Yeah, and I love the feedback. That's probably the main thing for us as English teachers, because that's so time-consuming to give otherwise, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And anything that can make it less arduous but still extremely beneficial for the students, I think we're all for that.
Joining the college in 2016, Apple Distinguished Educator Daniel Budd took on the role of Director of Learning Technologies. His challenge has been to build an advanced and innovative learning environment where technology is seamlessly integrated into everyday practice. So just for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself, Daniel.
So as you mentioned in the intro, I came to the college almost 2 years ago. So it's been a bit of a challenge. Obviously, the school had already had their Apple Distinguished School status, so I was sort of stepping into some big shoes there and making sure I continued on the great work of Trevor Galbraith, so he's got big shoes to fill. So I suppose what I tried to do coming into this space is to look at how technology was already being used, and then also look at our transition into iPads as well. So we were phasing out laptops at the time. But myself, I came previously from an all-boys school. I was in a similar sort of role doing technology integration there, and before that I was working in industry. So I was teaching for probably about 9 years now, and I worked in industry before then in IT.
Oh, interesting. Nice.
How was actually transitioning out the laptops and bringing in the iPads? Was it, quite a difficult period for teachers and students?
I think the students, as always, sort of bounce back quite quickly. There's the initial sort of hesitation, but then they work with what they're using, and they use it on a day-to-day basis all the time. I think it was more a challenge for the teachers because they're redesigning a lot of their tasks in order to utilize it in the iPad. But I think that's also a benefit of the iPad, right? It allowed teachers to look at what they were doing and then sort of reevaluate it and look at how they could do it differently as well. So I think that that transition, while painful for teachers and created work for teachers, I think that it really sort of helped teachers out in redefining what they were actually doing in the classroom.
Yeah, I think like anything, there's always going to be that initial resistance to change, and then, change sort of then becomes familiar, and it all sort of works out well in the end.
Well, we hope so.
Yeah.
So Dan, how would you describe the learning environment at Corpus?
So I think at the moment, our staff are at a point which it's called digital confidence. So we've now got 100% of our teachers have gained Apple teacher status, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But teachers are comfortable in having technology in their classrooms. They're comfortable with having technology around them, and they know the students have the devices in their hands. But what we really try and do at Corpus is ensure that technology is enhancing what teachers are doing in teaching and learning space. They're not using it for the sake of using it. And if you come visit our school, which we encourage people to do, I think you'll see that not every lesson uses technology. We use it when it's appropriate. We use it when it enhances the lesson and enhances teaching and learning. So I think the way technology looks in the school, it is quite blended. It's not at the forefront of everything we do. We like to think we educate children very well.
I think that is really important for the parents to know as well, because I know a lot of parent-teacher interviews, there's a lot of anxiety from the parents that they're just typing all the time on their iPads and they're not handwriting anymore. And we say, no, that's not actually what we're using the iPads for. It's not just because we're using it for a Word document. We're actually still writing in books, but we're just extending their learning with all the things that the iPad has to offer.
So how's the introduction of Apple technology empowered teachers and students at Corpus?
So I think the power of Apple, for example, and I suppose it always seems to be this Apple versus Microsoft or Apple versus Chromebooks or whatever, is with Apple, you're getting an ecosystem. So it's not just about the hardware that's in the hands of the students. It's also the multi-touch books which our teachers develop, or the iTunes U courses, or the teachers and the students who use the devices have a mindset of sharing and developing resources which allow everyone to use the technology. So I think by implementing an Apple ecosystem in our school, we're indoctrinating that culture as well. And we want our teachers to share, and we want our students to publish. And I think that's the beauty of the Apple ecosystem.
So you mentioned before the changing from the iPads to the laptops and sort of some of the resistance that came there. What have been some of the other major challenges of integrating these new technologies into the school?
Yes, I think there's always a J curve with implementing anything, whether it's a new curriculum or a different way of assessing, or a new sort of I suppose a new novel in English or something. Everyone's got to get their head around it. They've got to read the book. They've got to figure out what they're doing. So I think that's always a challenge. The students, as I said, always sort of bounce back, but we've really just got to support teachers, and we've got to give them sort of tap into their belief systems that what we're doing is the right thing. And unless you have that belief that this will eventually pay off and give you dividends, then I think you sort of lost them from day one. So it's a bit harder, I suppose, with curriculum in that way, because you don't have much of a choice. That gets set from a bit higher. But I think what we try and do is to make sure that our staff and our middle leaders are involved in decisions as much as possible, and let them know that we are listening to them and listening to their opinions, and try and implement technology in that way.
So steering away from the challenges for a moment, what have been some of the most successful moments that you've actually had with technology in your classroom?
So I think one of the most successful pieces of technology I've ever implemented is the Apple TV. I think that in classroom management, proximity is your biggest tool. Standing next to that kid who's mucking around while you're presenting is the biggest thing. And when technology came into the classroom, we were sort of tethered to the front through these data cables. I think that really took that power away from us. So I think implementing the Apple TVs was an easy win for everyone in the classroom, and it certainly changed my classroom in the way that I not only can project my own work from anywhere in the classroom, but I can get students to project their work. So promoting students as leaders, I think that's been a big win in my classroom, especially in computer science sort of area.
All right, thanks for that. So for our listeners, can you explain what Apple Teacher actually is and how it's been successful at Corpus?
Yeah, so I mentioned Apple Teacher before. Apple Teacher is basically like a series of courses, and it gives teachers a run through of ways in which Apple apps and Apple hardware can be utilized in the classroom. And teachers go through a series of support materials, and then they go through quick little tests to become badged as Apple teachers. So it's a base level, and that's the way we've sort of used it at our school. As I mentioned, we've got 100% of our teachers are now Apple teachers, which is a huge win for us. But it also sets the bar for, I think, as new teachers come in. It gives them a base level of information to know how they could utilize the technology in the classroom.
I know as well, some of our students here are also Apple teachers, aren't they?
Yeah. So we're actually using it for our year 7s as well, to give them a base knowledge and know how they can utilize it. So it's quite important for students, if they've come from a laptop school or a Windows school or whatever, how they can do some of the things which they previously did, take notes, organize their files and notes and those sort of things as well. So it's been great.
I know that it feels quite empowering to the students as well, having that sticker on their iPads that says that they're an Apple teacher, the same one that their teachers got. So I think that's, even just sort of their self-esteem, that's a really cool thing. Now, moving on, in March, I know you went to Chicago, didn't you, for the Apple Education event, and you met Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple. What were some of the other really exciting things that were announced and in Chicago?
Yeah, so it was a quick sort of jaunt over in Chicago. I was only there for 48 hours, so it was a bit of a fly-in, fly-out sort of event. But I think the event was quite unique. It was hosted in a Chicago sort of state school, as we would call it in Australia. It's a standard sort of school. It is a selective school in a way. Kids have to apply for it. It's not just if they live in the area. But it was quite unique in the way that Apple was really sort of showing that they're invested in education. And I think that was the big thing that I took away from it. It was talking about teachers and how proud and how hard working teachers were, and they had little videos and snippets of things which had the student voices about how much they appreciate their teachers. So I think what Apple is really trying to do and say here is that they're trying to support teachers, and they believe that education is the way forward, which we all believe as teachers. We believe that we can solve a lot of problems through education, but I think Apple's trying to show that they're on board with that through the event. So we also had some exciting other announcements as well, like the pencil on the lowest model of iPad, which is pretty fantastic. I know as English teachers, you guys will be quite excited about the opportunities that will come through. So hopefully next year we can get all of our kids with Apple pencils, and that will mean we can do a lot more with annotation and writing and drafting and note taking, which will be fantastic.
So Dan, in 10 years' time, what do you think the typical classroom practice will actually look like?
So this is a question I often get asked, being in technology integration, and I always sort of say, well, if I knew that, I'd be a lot richer and probably wouldn't be a teacher anymore. I mean, I would hope one of the predictions we like to make is that paper reduction would go down. And we've got doing this big project at the moment as we renew our printers about how much people are still printing. And while we are seeing a reduction of printing dramatically, I'd hope that printing is something we can move away from. And it's not saying moving away from books. It's more the way that people process information. You see a lot of people, especially in administration or leadership, who like to print off things that are on their screen just so they can annotate over the top of them. And I think with the movements in technology we're seeing with the Apple Pencil and the readability of screens now, that you can make text bigger and bolder and all those sort of things, I hope that we could change that culturally. I think there's an environmental message there, but I think it's something that which we could all actively try to pursue, is to reduce our impact on paper usage.
Now, you mentioned the way that they process information, at least from the administration side of things, but do you find that students have processed it differently with the integration of technology, or are they still very paper-based as well?
No, I think students have come leaps and bounds. I know when I first started integrating technology, you'd find the year 11s and 12s have been trained on certain ways, and you see that especially with school diaries. The year 11s and 12s are used to write something in your diary, and that's how you remind it, whereas the younger kids get trained on, I'll put a reminder in, I'll get Siri to remind me about something, those sort of things. They've been trained through education. So I think the students are good. It comes to where their teacher will say, I want you to print this, or I want this to be single page printed for submission, or something like that. So it sort of gets dictated by the teachers rather than the students.
It's interesting you said that about the older years, because I do notice that in the classroom that the year sevens are a lot more accepting of doing things on their iPads, whereas quite often I'll give a digital handout to my year 12s and they'll say, oh, look, Miss Johnson, could we actually print this so that we can write on it?
Yeah.
And I have to say yes, because it's how they're going to learn best. But it is interesting that it's only really 5 years difference there, but just how differently they're trained to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's training them. So I think if teachers, we consciously think about that, I think we can sort of change that.
And lastly, Dan, so what's your favorite app on the iPad, and how do you sort of integrate it so it gets the best possible teaching and learning out of it?
So my favorite app for a long time was always Explain Everything. It's quite a simple concept. It sort of runs along the line of a whiteboard app. So it's a blank page and you can record what you're doing and annotate over the top of it. And unfortunately, their subscription models, obviously they've got to make money, but they've modified their subscription models, which has made it less and less relevant in my classroom. It's difficult for me to dictate for students to purchase a subscription each year. So it's a bit of a shame, but now with the annotation and screen recording we have built into the iPad, we can just use Keynote, or we can just have a document. And I think the power of having students explain their learning or explain how they're solving a problem is very powerful in an array of subjects, not just my own. So I think Explain Everything would be my favourite app.
And Keynote's had that update now that you can draw in the actual slides as well. So
yeah, exactly. So that was released in Chicago as well with the new annotations. Also in Pages, which you guys will probably like, is if a student submits a piece of writing and they've typed it all out and you add annotations, the annotations will move in line. So if they correct something, the annotations will move down with it. So it's not sort of posted over the top of the writing. It's actually connected to the text, which is going to be great for English.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for your time, Dan. You've given us a lot of insight, I guess, into what you do and where technology is going. And thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Dan, if anyone wants to find out a bit more information about you or follow you on Twitter, what was your handle?
So my handle on Twitter is @DanielBBudd. So there's lots of B's and D's in there. My website is danielbudd.com.au. But you can Google a lot of my work. I've got lots of multi-touch books in the iBook store. So if you have a search through there, you'll be able to find a lot of my body of work.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Thanks.
Our next guest is a globally renowned art teacher who is passionate about the creative integration of technology in education. Apple Distinguished Educator Cathy Hunt from St Hilda's School in Queensland is an educational consultant, author and keynote speaker who has presented at EdTech conferences such as iPad Palooza and ISTE, which is the International Society for Technology in Education. Hi Cathy, how are you first of all?
Always excited to talk about arts and technology, and excitement factor is always high.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Can you tell us a bit about where your journey with iPad actually began?
It's actually kind of super interesting, or at least I think it is in hindsight, and potentially didn't realize it at the time. But our school, the school that I was previously at, decided to go one-to-one, and that was a heck of a journey across the whole school except for 2 departments, which was PE and visual arts. And so I was kind of amazed at that. I sort of thought, look, we really, really want our students to be using them in the classrooms. If everyone else is finding them advantageous, then surely we would too in the arts. But it was kind of just an idea I had. I didn't really know why I thought that they would be advantageous, besides not wanting to be positioned as other, I guess, and what that would mean in a crowded curriculum, what it would mean to parents, and what it would sort of look like if we were the only sort of subject areas not going down that pathway. So I got really involved with trying to work out what the heck this little machine could do. And my only experiences really were with Photoshop and really heavy editing suites on desktops. And I hadn't brought that to my classroom, despite teaching for 10 years or whatever at that point. It was too difficult in my setting to get students around desktops. We only had 2 of them in our classroom. And so I guess when I first sort of started to explore the ease of stop motion and started to understand how wonderful the connected camera could be with creative apps, there was so little barrier to entry for my students that we were on board really, really quickly, and we've never looked back.
So, like Corpus, St. Hilda's is also an Apple Distinguished school. So, how would you describe the learning environment at that school?
I think for me, really, even if we just take the word learning out of that for a moment and just talk about the environment, it's really a place of relationships. And I'm certainly not the only person who talks a lot about how the strength of relationships is absolutely paramount to the fabric of the community that kind of holds a school together. But I think, we're in a very fortunate position as an independent school on the Gold Coast. We have a very diverse community, but certainly lots of assets in our school. And so one of the things that I think has defined our journey is our motto, which is non nobis solum, or not for ourselves alone. And that sort of means that the gifts and talents that we have as a student body, as a teaching body, and beyond into our wider community, we share those things. So we've had an amazing setup for our Learning Institute, which involves huge iTunes U courses, lots of books, and really just a very active dialogue all the time about what it is that we can do to support others who don't have the same privilege that we do.
Fantastic. And you've mentioned sharing with the community, and you personally are fantastic for that with your website. So tell us a little bit about iPadartroom.com.
It's funny, isn't it? Like it started as a blog, but I have joked with people who know the pain that it was almost a cry for help. I could have named it something very different at the time, something like just scream.com. Because essentially I was trying to work out how to use iPads when I made quite a noise about getting them for my classroom and had no idea what was happening. And in those very early days, there were just no resources available. It was really hard to see what other educators were doing. I joined Twitter at that time because someone randomly told me to do that would be a good thing. And gee, that was an amazing place and a fantastic community to be a part of. I knew I'd really got onto something there. And the blog just became sort of a sharing space. So initially I was just putting up questions and I was hoping someone would answer. And I was putting up student work when it was amazing. It was a really random collection of things. But actually that was good because, as they say, perfection is the enemy of the good. And what happened from that point was I started to realize what was actually useful for other people was the fact that I was sharing successes, questions, and failures. They started doing the same, and now it's very directed towards people who are starting the journey with iPads and teachers who are using iPads in classrooms where they'd really like to be more connected to the creative aspects of those devices. And so we've gone really from this place where it was a random collection to a place where thousands of teachers come every day. And I'm really proud of that. But I think what I'm most proud of is the fact that there's a huge student component to it. And it's really always been about allowing students to, through me, show their work. Because in this wonderful space where we have so much photography happening in our classrooms, we really do change minds and we show teachers what is possible because it happens in my classroom with real kids. The work is all real. There's no, samples. There's no textbooks made by, people making money. It's just teachers and their students doing phenomenal things. And it really does give people the power to go and try something different for the good of children in their rooms.
Just for our listeners, Cathy does have you have a plethora really of student work on your website and also on your Twitter. Could you give us an example of a project or workflow that has really worked?
Yeah, I think for me, I love talking about the connection between, the kind of identity that people have as creatives and the way that devices can support creative confidence growth. So in other words, this idea that we may have that drawing something representational or something that looks like it really does in real life is just this fantastic symbol of your creative status. It really, I'm going to use these words, but it destroys lives. It really can for some students mean that in their earliest attempts to draw, they start to believe that they are not creative or that their capacity to create is very, very limited. And so it doesn't seem to matter at what age the entry point is there. For some, the digital device allows them to push undo 100 times over, or to use a photograph and to do something with tracing on top where they just think, that's phenomenal, that's the best thing I've ever done in my life. And when you get that buzz and you get that sense of satisfaction, that sense of worth, that sense of purpose, everything else can grow from there. So I'm really not about producing artists. I love it when that happens, because I do believe that we are all artists. But as far as labels, it isn't about that at all. It's getting children to see how they can be successful. So all of the examples that I show are really about entry points, cross-curricular initiatives, and things where we're really pulling down the barriers towards creativity so that it's accessible for everyone.
So how has iPad empowered your students and transformed their learning? And can you possibly give us some examples of that as well?
I think for me, a lot of it's about starting with the connected camera, because it's really about allowing students to see the potential in every day, every moment, all of the assets, I guess, that they have around them. So, I love it when I see a student take their phone out of their pocket and snap a shot. To me, it sort of almost doesn't matter what it is that they're taking a photograph of, because in that act, there's a teachable moment. There's a starting point. There's something happening where I see a student take a photo and I know they're interested in whatever it is that lens is looking at. And so if we can leverage that, I think that's really, really powerful. And I see now that for students, by the time particularly they're in upper middle school, the device that they're most likely to be creative with is going to be their phone. So as an entry point to that kind of space that they can work on, the iPad's that great conduit towards like a larger screen real estate, getting their hands on that, really being able to look up close at photos in detail, getting their pencil on it, but also working right on out of that screen, printing what they've created, ripping it up, collaging it, building it into a cityscape, photographing it again, maybe by way of a stop motion to watch that thing grow in front of them. And at the end of the day, having something that you made on iPad could be really obvious in the case of a digital drawing. But, we've created whole shopping centres with packaging that we've designed from the ground up, through geometric, foldable nets that we've designed on iPad. So whether it's at the start, the end, or permeating the whole way through a project, it's certainly an incredibly useful tool.
Yeah,
I think that's really interesting as well. Like, not necessarily getting rid of the stuff that you used to do, but just intertwining sort of the iPad in there to enhance that sort of that process and that experience, but then still keeping the sort of the physical aspect in there as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that you raise, and something that I talk about a lot, because technology isn't about getting rid of things. And I know that that's a mantra that's used a lot in the world of technology. But in the arts, it's also a case of, artists have been at the forefront of technology since the dawn of time. They've always been interested in pushing the boundaries, and it's a very mixed media place to work. We're quite comfortable with using watercolor on paper and then photographing that and putting it on Instagram. And so when our students work, I'm kind of always challenging not just curriculum silos, but actually the ways that they create. So the term digital art is a bit problematic for me. Sometimes a photograph of a student creating a work can become the work. A stop motion of their sculpture in progress could become the work. It's very narrow to think about on screen as digital and everything else as hands-on. But the lovely thing about art teachers, my people, is that they are very, very protective of the hands-on, sort of believing that they're the keepers of this very, very important part of the curriculum. And I've found that recently the maker movement, a lot of work around STEAM, has sort of really been talking about the assets that we've taken for granted in the studio a lot, and is bringing that into other spaces. So to have at the moment such a dialogue around the hands-on is very powerful, but I know that it's problematic in that we have to have the conversation. In this climate, it's absolutely paramount that we do have the discussion, because specialist teachers are fewer and further between. And again, it's that idea of sharing between us that's going to move us forward.
So you had a busy year in 2017 presenting at Q and ISTE. So how was that, and what did you actually take out of those two things?
Yeah, busy year is kind of an understatement. It was nuts. I think I went to Miami at the end of the year, and I was actually in the air for more time than I was on the ground. And that's that's when I sort of went, all right, so that was a big year. But as I sort of was just alluding to in the previous comment, it's an amazing time in that the whole idea of having an art teacher on stage at ISTE or Q with those massive audiences in the thousands, I just can't imagine that would have happened 4 or 5 years ago. So it's certainly it's a very humbling experience to think that the things that you hold dear to your heart are of interest to others, and could possibly help to change minds. I was certainly extremely jet lagged for 99% of the year, but I know that I just want to keep, having this discussion, because the images that I have of students and the pictures of their incredible work, I think really to be able to put those in front of people, it's actually then the students who do the work to move education forward for us as teachers. Like, my voice is nowhere near as powerful as 28 students in my class can be. I've seen that. I've seen the way that it makes real for teachers, the potential. And so I'm just so thankful that places like Q and ISTE have been so supportive of a kid from the country in Australia who does wild things with wild kids in iPad land and everything else. And it's been a joy to see things change. Every day, literally every day, I have emails and tweets and direct messages and things with people asking questions. And that means they're thinking, they're asking, and they're pushing their practice. So, what a privilege, right?
You mentioned you get quite a lot of emails asking questions. What sort of advice do you offer to teachers who are inexperienced or unsure about how to implement technology into their lessons or into their classrooms?
Yeah, there's sort of two pathways. Like, some people will say, "Oh, just try this little thing and take a step." And it's funny, like I did start when I began sharing, kind of thinking through that idea. When I was first asked to, maybe come along to a particular conference and share what I'd learned, I sort of thought, well, if we do these little bits and pieces, people will be able to take steps. But do you know what? Now I find that I love to do things where it's actually about a big project, one that has real worth to the people involved, something where, it's got that excitement factor for the teacher. If they're excited about learning something new, the kids will be too. If they're a little bit worried about how it will go, almost always it's going to be a creative project that's pushing them out of their current pedagogical approach. So I love channeling a bit more effort towards something that's just so worth that investment in time. Anything, where you say that the T word to teachers, time, is an interesting conversation, because we're all just so incredibly busy. So if I'm going to ask someone to have a crack at something and to ask for their time on it, it's got to be worth the effort for the students. So that's a really, really important thing, is just to not be scared. You can't break the damn things. Just get in there and give something a go, and then have a look for a project maybe that someone else has done that you think really does have worth, and that is worth your time.
This next question I love, but basically, if you had to delete all educational apps except for one, which would you save?
Easy peasy, the camera. No way is the device, worth carrying around with you without that camera. Everything else really for me starts with that idea that it's your window into the world. And, with so much talk about students as creatives, creators, and that whole idea of moving away from a consumption device, this is the key, right? Because if you begin with something that's by definition original, then there's only forward from there. So the camera's got to stay.
It's interesting you say that, but do you find sometimes it can be problematic because of some of the apps that students can access with the camera, or you never really found that it's, been a hindrance in your classroom?
Yeah, to be honest, I think that the camera is really just that idea that if you start from that point, you've got all of these potential options. So when the students, are really engaged with the project, when they're excited about creating something, I really don't have any problems with engagement. That's the same with other tools and techniques too. There's no shortage of students doodling or, creating something that's completely off track if the project that they're involved in isn't something that they're heavily invested in. So it's really my job to support that environment for creativity, and to understand that moving off task can be for a whole variety of reasons. In fact, the digital devices are no different. So the camera for me is just a part of that discussion.
All right, fantastic.
We'll keep the camera.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners, can you actually let us know what the name of your website is and also what your Twitter handle is?
Isn't it super creative? It's iPadartroom.com. Amazing work there, Cathy. Well done. And my Twitter handle is art_Cathy Hunt because iPad Art Room was taken. No, I mean, at the end of the day, you can contact me in a lot of different ways, but the thing is, I'll always reply if it's a teacher, if it's a question. It's a great privilege to be able to share, and sharing is caring.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. We really, really appreciate it. And
No worries.
You've given us a very interesting perspective coming from an art teacher. We often don't talk about, when we look at technology, we talk to sort of the people running the technologies, but it's great to talk to a teacher as well, just really go-getting and using that in their classroom. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Cathy.
Thank you, guys.
Well, it's been an interesting couple of interviews in the staff room for us, hasn't it, Michael?
Yes, it has.
Yeah, so what have been some of your favourite takeaways, I guess, from either Daniel or Cathy?
Well, Cathy in particular, I just thought it was absolutely amazing the way she spoke about educators wrestling back the way they teach and the way they go about things. So instead of it being so linear, actually having these multiple approaches and working collaboratively to actually get their ideas across to one another. And that even shows with her website. It's just so transparent. Like, she has examples of, some times where it might have been a bit challenging doing what she was doing, except the idea is that it's there for people to still see, so they understand these failures are, so they happen so often, except there are ways around them and there are ways to improve, but no educators found, that way to perfect it yet, except we are, we're getting there slowly.
Yeah, I love how collaborative she is as well. Like, she's always just sharing everything she's got and helping people, and it's really inspiring, isn't it? It makes you want to be a really great teacher yourself.
It's great. So passionate.
Yeah, it was super passionate. And I was just thinking before what Daniel was saying, that really struck a chord with me was how he was talking about technology in the classroom, and to sort of move away from the stigma that, if the kids have iPads, you need to be using technology for every single lesson, because technology shouldn't be used for the sake of using it. It should be, invisible. It should just be there to enhance learning, to make it better. It should seem seamless rather than forced. And yeah, I think I can really bring that back down to my teaching and think, okay, maybe we can put the iPads away, go back to books today, because we don't really need them, but we'll use them when we do. Yeah,
that's great. And he also did speak about the idea of steering away from paper slowly as well, and just that short difference between students that started using laptops, say 5 years ago compared to 8 years ago, and how different they consume and also use technology. It's just fascinating to see and hear about.
It's interesting to see how the kids are changing with the times.
Oh yeah. Thanks so much for listening to the first ever podcast of the Staff Room, and thanks to our guests Daniel Budd and Cathy Hunt.
Please leave a review on iTunes. We appreciate your feedback. This has been the first episode of the Staff Room. Listen out for episode 2, which will be a part 2 of our discussions on technology changing our classroom. Until next time, this has been Tessa Johnson and Michael Royale.